Podcasts on UNC-TV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
How does a non-believer answer his children's questions about God and religion? And this is a challenge that sent Andrew Park on a journey of discovery and inquiry about his own beliefs and his own roots as far as religion is concerned, and brought it all together in his book, Between a Church and a Hard Place. One faith-free dad's struggle to understand what it means to be religious or not. And we'll follow Andrew Park's journey when we talk to him on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, Quail Ridge Books and Music, and the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is Andrew Park. Andrew is the author of Between a Church and a Hard Place, with a subtitle that explains the book, One Faith-Free Dad's Struggle to Understand What It Means to Be Religious or Not. Andrew Park, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was so glad to have you. Grew up in North Carolina in Charlotte, where your father was a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And although your family had close ties to religious leaders in North Carolina and across the country, across the world really, you grew up in your parents were non-religious. They'd had enough of it in terms of their growing up experience, and had pretty deep feelings that their children were not going to grow up under the influence of the same sort of hard-nosed religious doctrines and ways that they had grown up. And so you grew up in a non-religious household. All that was working fine until your children came along, started asking questions. You remember the question that you describe in the book that kind of set you off?
Well, this was actually a question we had from my son, who was about 3 years old at the time. He came home from preschool, which was a preschool that we had sent him to that was actually run out of a Methodist church. And we heard him for the first time ever say the word God. And we knew that based on our own approach to religion and our own kind of discomfort with discussing it with our children, that he hadn't heard it from us. And so while I panicked, my wife asked my son who God was and what God does. And my son's answer kind of sent us off on this journey. He said that God made us, and we asked, well, how did he make us? And he said, well, he screws on our heads and pops in our eyeballs.
Well, so why does that's the kind of question and answer that could have developed in a religious household. So why does that send you on a journey?
Well, because I had, partly because of my upbringing, really avoided thinking too hard or talking too much about religion up to that point. It was something that I felt other people did, and not something that was of particular interest to me. And also something that made me a little bit uncomfortable, because I had seen the way that religion, especially organized religion in its extremist varieties, could cause conflict and make people unhappy and uncomfortable. And because I had made it through childhood without that influence and felt like I was a fairly upstanding, ethical person, I thought it was something that we could just push to the side and not think about too much in raising our own children.
Well, I mean, you're a keen observer of American life, and also the importance of an ethical, sort of a common ethic that holds us together as a community. And the kinds of things you look at that do that, the family life, of course, is the family background. Everybody would say that school is a place where values develop. And many people would say that underlying all of this, the different religious communities really contribute to, in addition to the conflicts that you mentioned before, that putting aside religious beliefs, that the value system that is created in terms of the religious communities has served our overall community pretty well.
Yeah.
In the face of that, do you have a problem isolating your children from that particular vehicle to socialize them and to give them a background of ethical values?
Well, I think absolutely. I did have a problem, a concern, a worry in myself that I was isolating them, and that was a bad thing. I think if I had been somebody who was completely anti-religion, it would have been easy to hear what the funny things that my son was saying about God and just dismiss them out of hand and say, well, that's all hooey, son, don't worry about that. But really it was this feeling that despite my own struggle with belief, my own non-belief, that denying my children an opportunity to experience the social, the emotional, the ethical, the communal benefits of religion, which I think are real and can't be dismissed out of hand. I almost felt like that was, a subtle form of child abuse. Not that it had hurt me as I was a child, but that it was something that I wanted to open up as a possibility for them. I didn't want to deny them that route, and I think exposure to it has a lot to do with that.
Well, I wonder, after reading your book, well, we all walk two lines with children. We want to train them to make their own choices.
Right.
We want to empower them to make their own choices, and then we want them to make the right choices.
Right.
We want them to make the right choices. So if you've got a religious background, you want your children to be empowered to make their own choices, but you really want them to come into the fold. And so I wonder, from the standpoint of a non-religious household, whether you share that feeling that you want to empower them to make their own choices, but you're hoping that they make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Of course. I think that's absolutely universal. And in some ways it's more, there's a sharper edge to it, because as a non-believer, some might say I'm a humanist, or just some might call me a free thinker. I'm really committed to the idea that children should be able to make up their own minds, should be able to think for themselves, given the tools to think for themselves, but make up their own minds about critical questions. And yet, a lot of people who are in my same position are really, really fearful that the result of that will be that our children will somehow embrace religion, and maybe even in one of its more extreme varieties. And so in some ways the tension is even greater, because here you are philosophically committed to the idea that everybody should be able to think for themselves and dogma is a bad thing. But it's really, you have the same fear that other parents would, which is, what if my kid grows up thinking completely differently than I do? And what if we're not on the same page? What if we can't feel like, trust that we have the same values and belief systems and view of the world once I'm done parenting them?
Well, it's interesting. I think, from the standpoint of religious families, particularly in a more conservative religious environment, when there is a very strong feeling that you really have to be a believer or you're a lost soul, that in one of those strong families, when a child makes a different decision and turns in a different direction, you're pained by that loss because of a feeling that they're really lost, forever. Right. On the other hand, in a non-religious household, there, as you've just described, there's a hope that the child will follow the traditions of the family, even though you give them the tools to make their own choices. Well, now in your family, your own family, you all, not your family and your children, but your family and your brother.
Yeah.
You all experienced sort of the opposite direction, where your brother, raised in a non-religious household, found a different way to look at things. And will you tell us how that happened, and then what the result was with the family and how it's worked out?
Well, my brother was raised the same way that I was, and in some ways was even more a non-believer than I ever was. He called himself an atheist up until the time he was a
he
senior in
just
high
said
school.
not an agnostic,
Right.
he's not a skeptic. He's an
atheist.
He's sure that there isn't a God.
As a middle schooler, and was a very bright and precocious kid. And when he was a senior in high school, 17 years old, he came to my parents one day and said, "I'm now a Christian." And he had,
out of the blue?
to their mind, out of the blue. He says it had actually been building over the course of some weeks and months, but it was out of the blue in that sense. And he had developed, on the one hand, a real intellectual interest in religion. He had read Flannery O'Connor at governor's school the summer before his senior year. He had talked about C.S. Lewis with Christian kids that he had met there. He had started to develop an interest in religion and in faith, and then he had started to feel a real kind of supernatural pull, a spiritual pull that he had never felt before. This did not go over so well with my parents.
Tell us, this is so interesting, I guess is the right word, but I mean, trying to get an ear in the dynamics in the family of what's happening. And here is a guy who is on his own come to a decision about religion that is in conflict with his family's sort of viewpoint. And remember this for us.
Yeah. This was, I talk about it in the book, this was, to my mind, kind of the perfect teenage rebellion. This was a perfect 10, here you have parents who have raised you to be intellectual and open-minded, and he comes along and kind of tests to see how open-minded they really want to be. My parents.
Now, just excuse me for interrupting you about this, but I mean, this is your framework on it. You're sitting back there watching this.
Yeah.
So in one sense, you don't share this viewpoint.
No.
But you're saying, go get them. Kind of, anything to get the parents.
Right.
Is that right? I mean,
I was actually more on their side, to be honest with you. I felt some of the pain that they felt. They felt very quickly pain that somehow their values were being betrayed by their oldest child, and that they were getting ready to send him out into the world, off to college and into adulthood. And he was deciding to go in a completely different direction. You have to think about the context of the times, too. We lived in Charlotte. This was the mid-'80s. The evangelical resurgence was really starting to happen. You were seeing the early years of the moral majority and the religious right. And it was not just that my brother decided that he was interested in C.S. Lewis. It was that he immediately embraced a very conservative, almost orthodox style of Christianity that my parents were seeing in the culture all around them. They were seeing it in people like Jerry Falwell. They were seeing it, unfortunately, in people like Jim Baker. And that was repellent to them, that brand of religion. It wasn't just that it was religion, it was that it was this, what they would have termed at the time, fundamentalist Christianity that rejected, in their mind, thought and open-mindedness and critical thinking in favor of dogma.
Well, your brother wasn't threatening them in terms of trying to change y'all's family attitudes. He was just asking for the freedom to make his own mind up. Was that his approach, or was he?
He was. I'm not sure he was asking for it. I think he was declaring it. He was taking that mantle and running with it. And you know what? He was 17, so he probably had the right to do that. It was, I think in a close family, it was exactly the same conflict that would have happened had the roles been reversed. It was not as much about the religion per se. It was more about, we thought we knew you, and here you are declaring yourself to be somebody totally different, and totally different from what we brought you up to be.
Well, how did it all work out?
Well, it was a conflict with our family for a number of years. My brother went off to college, and my parents felt that some of the people that he began to associate with in college were using, cult-like tactics to encourage his participation in religion, his faith, encourage his isolation from college life. There's a part of the book where I talk about he lived in an intentional community in Philadelphia, and he and his other male friends declared themselves to be bachelors till the rapture. They felt like that you know, celibacy and disinterest in girls as college students was the right way to go, because they could that way devote more of their time and attention to God. And all of this, things like this, struck my parents as absolutely crazy and at times dangerous. And ultimately they felt the need to bring in someone to try to, quote unquote, deprogram my brother, because they thought he was really under the control of a cult.
Your brother's in college. He's sort of age of majority.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
right do the parents have to bring somebody in?
Just the right of the, you know, kind of late 20th century parent who's not quite willing to totally.
And how did that work out?
It didn't work out very well, and they were really estranged, like I said, for a number of years. And
I mean, there was an intervention staged, and your brother.
He rejected that. He rejected that, and went off on his own for a year or so, and it took a long time for those wounds to be
Well, this
healed.
is an important part of your book, and I'd like to talk about it for the rest of the time, but I want to move on to other things.
Okay.
But before we leave it, what is the relationship between you and your parents are now gone, but between you and your brother now, and you're both sort of polar opposites in terms of religious beliefs. How's it working?
Well, we are still polar opposites in terms of our worldview. We were able to maintain over the course of 20 years a very good relationship and a loving relationship, but we had done so in part by avoiding the issue of religion and avoiding talking about what had torn him apart from my parents. One of the just, you know, great things about getting to write this book was that it gave me an opportunity to sit down and engage with him about his religious beliefs and about his faith and where that had come from, and learn more about it for the very first time. And so I would say that has even strengthened our relationship further. We do have a great relationship.
Well, in looking at it, I mean, this is the wonder that I have as you look at religious people, including your brother, or especially your brother, and see the strength that it's brought and the kind of understanding more the way that it's happened, maybe a little bit of a supernatural experience that comes along to draw that in. Do you say, gosh, thank goodness I'm not there? Or do you say, it wouldn't be so bad if this had happened to me? I could deal with this, but it didn't happen to me. Right. But it could have happened to me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I wouldn't have written this book if there wasn't at least part of me that was envious of that dimension that many people have in their lives, and I don't have it in my life, and I may someday. But certainly, I look at my brother, and especially now that I know more about how he came to his faith, and it intrigues me. There's absolutely an allure there, and in talking with other religious people. But I also don't think you can fake it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good place to move on. I don't want to encourage you to fake it. Another of the many interesting parts of your book is your exploration of your, I just say religious roots, in terms of your family's background and the important background that your ancestors played in the development of the Pentecostal movement, and particularly here in North Carolina, and your trip back to Falcon. Will you tell us what you found out about your family?
Sure. Well, my great-grandfather, Julius Colbreth, was one of the early holiness converts in North Carolina. In the mid-1890s, he had attended just almost on a lark, attended a tent revival in Dunn, not far from where he lived, which was Falcon, and been what they called at the time sanctified, which was brought to the holiness faith. And from there, he really directed the rest of his life to supporting the holiness movement and then the Pentecostal Holiness Church when those merged after the turn of the century. And the town of Falcon, which was
Let me just interrupt you about this, because I never heard of Falcon before. It's right there on I-95 near, would you say, near between Fayetteville and Dunn, and a little town, but it's like a religious shrine for many. It's real important.
It is because when my great-grandfather was beginning his involvement with the holiness movement, he offered up this town, much of the land of which was in his family, for a number of activities that became early kind of hubs of activity around the nation in the Pentecostal Holiness Church. So he started a camp meeting in 1900 that is still going on today, an annual summer gathering of Pentecostals, Pentecostal Holiness people. It was actually open to all faiths, but it became a very important camp meeting. He started an orphanage that in Falcon that is still operating today and still operated by the Pentecostal Holiness Church. He also built a tabernacle that was originally for community prayer meetings. He built this with his own hands, and it was in the early part of the 20th century, where the Pentecostal Holiness Church and the Fire Baptized Holiness Church merged by decree of the leaders in that place, which formed what is today called the International Pentecostal Holiness Church.
Which is the broad millions and millions of people
right.
adhere to this brand of faith. And we don't want to
But Falcon was really, because of this hub of activity, it became known as, and I think my great-grandfather was happy to declare it a holy city. And there was really a thought that here was a place where people who were of that faith could live apart from many of the parts of modern life, urban life, that were to them repellent. So,
well, what's it like? I mean, as a part of your journey of discovery, you revisited Falcon.
Did.
Revisited?
Yeah.
Was it first?
It wasn't my first time. I'd been a couple of times when I was a kid, but I don't think I really understood its significance.
So you're walking in there. You're a non-believer, but you're the descendant of the hero of the faith.
Right.
And what kind of reaction did you find to? What kind of reaction did you find to as a non-believer but blood descendant of the hero?
Yeah. Well, my great-grandfather is still treated as a hero there, and that's something that's very obviously makes me very proud and is exciting for me to be in that place. But the Pentecostal Holiness faith, especially as it is practiced by some of the older generations, who are a lot of whom you see at camp meeting in Falcon, is a very different thing than anything I'd ever experienced. You walk into the little tabernacle that my great-grandfather built, his portrait, and he and my great-grandmother's portrait is on the back wall. And very quickly people are speaking in tongues, they are singing and dancing. It's nothing that was at all kind of uncomfortable for me, but at the same time I felt very much isolated, very different from any of the folks who were there. They were people who engage and enliven their faith on an almost daily basis, and this is a very natural thing for them.
Well, again, I asked you about your experience with your brother, and although the religious experience of the Pentecostals might be different from even your idea of what regular religion would be, you see people who are engaged in an activity and in a religious experience that obviously is satisfying to them and allows them to communicate with each other and with the Spirit.
That's right.
I mean, are you envious of these people?
Again, it is like I said before. It is a dimension that I don't experience in my own life. And what is fascinating to me about going back and seeing the roots of my great-grandfather's faith and all that he did with that is to think about how those kind of came back full circle with my brother. I mean, my brother's faith is a charismatic faith. It's one that is very much enlivened by the Holy Spirit, and while he would not call himself necessarily a Pentecostal, he shares a lot of that same devotion that my great-grandfather had,
wow.
100 years later. And it just shows you how, in an American family, these things can ebb and flow, that religious feeling, religious belief, you can go, as I say in the book, you can go from, holiness to humanist and back to holiness, in just a few generations.
Well, there's so many more things to talk about in your book, and I wish we had time to talk about all of them. I'm really curious, though, outside the book, now that it's all done and you have a chance to reflect on it without having to worry about writing it down and making it work right. What did you learn that's important that you didn't know before?
One thing that I learned that was important to me was that my job as a parent wasn't necessarily to find the answer for my children. It was really to give them the tools to be successful and prosperous and happy as adults. And if that is the case, then the most important thing for them to see from me is that that I'm honest and courageous enough about this question, this question of what is the meaning of life and is there a God, these questions, that I don't shy away from them, that I don't avoid them just because I don't know the answer. And that's a little antithetical to what we normally think about as parents. We normally think we need to have all the answers for our kids because otherwise where are they going to get them? They're going to get them from people we may not agree with. But I learned that it's actually okay to continue to struggle with this even as a parent and even as your children are watching you. I hope it's okay.
Well, what a story. Andrew Park, thanks for sharing with us your journey, your book, Between a Church and a Hard Place, One Faith-Free Dad's Struggle to Understand What It Means to Be Religious or Not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all y'all for listening. We appreciate your joining us here with North Carolina Bookwatch, and I hope that you'll come back here again same time next week, and I'll introduce you to another great North Carolina writer. In the meantime, check our website, blog. You can find information about current programs, upcoming programs, and authors that we've talked to in the past. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, Quail Ridge Books and Music, and the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Podcasts on UNCTV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.